There is a moment between sleep and full wakefulness when you do not yet remember, 1 or 2 seconds, sometimes longer, of simple neutrality. The light comes in. The body registers warmth or cold. Nothing has yet been assembled into the day's particular weight, and then it comes back, not all at once, in pieces. The relationship, the career, the version of your life that existed before, whatever happened that made before and after into what the actual shape of your days. The pieces land, one by one, and you feel them land. In the chest specifically, a tightening there as the picture reassembles itself, something that makes the ordinary effort of getting up and moving through the morning feel like walking through something thick and resistant, something the body knows is wrong before the mind has even fully named it. You stand in front of the mirror and something does not quite line up. The face is yours, but the person looking out from behind it, the one who knows what they are doing, who has a direction, who can organize the story of themselves into something coherent enough to share, that person is less certain than they used to be, or perhaps not there at all. You look, and behind the familiar surface of your own features there is a question, not philosophical, not abstract, not the kind of question you ask in moments of reflective luxury. The kind you ask when the floor has dropped out and you are no longer sure what is holding you. Who am I now? Not the role, you have lost the role, or it has changed beyond recognition. Not the relationship, that is gone, or so altered that the version of yourself that lived inside it no longer seems available. Not the plan dissolved with the circumstances that made it possible. You knew who you were inside those structures. You had the title, the function, the daily shape of a life that said, this is who this person is. And now the structures are gone, and you are standing in their absence, wondering where the self went. Most people, when they arrive here, will do one of two things. They will rush to rebuild, grabbing at any available structure, any new role, any identity that can be assembled fast enough to fill the terrifying openness of not knowing. Or they will dissolve into the emptiness, concluding that if the structures are gone, then they themselves must be gone, that the collapse is the verdict, that this groundlessness is permanent and descriptive of something essential. Neither road leads where it appears to, because what fell apart was not you. What fell apart was the structure you had built around you, the role, the plan, the image, the version of yourself that others recognized and that you had learned to recognize in their recognition of you. The person standing in the rubble, disoriented and afraid, reaching for something solid to hold. That person is not absent. That person is, perhaps for the first time in a long while, undisguised. The collapsing was not the end of who you are. It was the removal of who you were performing. When the structure falls, the mind does something very specific. It reaches for the familiar, for the old coordinates, the title, the role, the daily function that said, this is what I do, therefore this is who I am. It reaches for the narrative that organized everything into a manageable story, and when it reaches and finds those familiar things are not there, or that they no longer mean what they once meant, the mind begins to panic, not always dramatically, sometimes quietly. The quiet panic is almost worse, a low, persistent disorientation, a sense of moving through days that have lost their texture, of going through motions that no longer connect to anything inside you. You looked for yourself in what you did. You looked for yourself in the role you played, the partner, the professional, the parent, the one who had it together. You looked for yourself in the recognition of others, in the reflection you could see in their faces when they knew your name and the life that went with it. And when those things changed, when the role dissolved or was taken or became unrecognizable, you looked everywhere and found only the question. This is not a sign of failure. It is not evidence that your life was built on the wrong foundations, or that you were shallow, or that the structures you organized around were mistakes. It is what happens when any person confuses the scaffolding for the building. And here is what most people do not say clearly enough. The scaffolding is where everyone starts. You cannot build without it. The external structures, the roles, the relationships, the daily patterns, the identity that functions in the world. These are what you stand on while the real building takes shape. The scaffolding is not a mistake. It was intelligence under pressure. It was how you survived, how you contributed, how you found your footing in the world, while the slower and quieter work of actually knowing yourself could proceed beneath the surface. But the scaffolding was never the building. It was what surrounded the building, while the building was being made. And when the scaffolding comes down, whether by choice or by circumstance, whether violently or gradually, what is revealed is not the absence of something. It is the presence of what was always being constructed beneath the visible external structure you had built for others to see. Losing your role is not losing yourself. Losing your plan is not losing your direction. Losing the version others recognized is not losing who you actually are. These distinctions are not offered as comfort. They are orientation. The first reliable landmarks in terrain that feels entirely unfamiliar. Think of a scaffold around a building under construction. From the street, the scaffold is prominent. It defines the visible shape of the thing, gives it edges, tells the eye roughly where the structure is. And when the scaffold is removed, suddenly, completely, the instinct is to look at what was behind it with a kind of shock. Not because something is gone, but because something has been revealed that was always there, that the scaffold had been temporarily and necessarily occupying the space of. The building was not the scaffold. The building was what the scaffold was protecting while it came to completion. You are not the scaffold. You are what was being built while the scaffold stood. Begin quietly. You are not it. Find a piece of paper and write down the roles and structures that have fallen or changed beyond recognition. The titles, the functions, the version of yourself you presented to the world when those things were in place. Look at the list carefully. Those are the things that fell. Now ask yourself, as honestly as you can, before any of those things existed, what was already there? Not an answer you have to give anyone, only a question held in private. And once you see what the collapse revealed, another movement becomes impossible to ignore, the one that began almost immediately after the fall. You started searching, not consciously, not with full awareness of what you were doing, but the searching began almost before the rubble had settled, because the groundlessness of not knowing is genuinely difficult to sustain. The mind organized around specific structures does not easily tolerate their absence. It reaches for anything that offers the sensation of solid ground beneath it. And so most people, in the aftermath of a significant collapse, do one of several things. Some rebuild immediately. Another relationship, another project, another identity constructed as fast as possible, so that the terrifying openness of not knowing can be covered over before it has time to say what it came to say. Some look for the story, the narrative that makes the collapse. That's with why it's mimi for main that really happened and why that converts the raw and chaotic experience into something organized and therefore manageable. Some look for their old self in new circumstances, trying on the same roles in different contexts, hoping the costume will still fit even though the theater has changed. This is not weakness, it was intelligence under pressure. The impulse to restore structure when structure collapses is deeply reasonable. Groundlessness is not a comfortable condition, and the mind that has learned to function within structure will always, automatically, try to rebuild it. That is not failure. That is the mind doing exactly what the mind does. But here is what the searching costs. It prevents you from inhabiting the clearing. And the clearing is where the real information lives. When you rush to fill the space the collapse created. When you reach for any available identity rather than staying with the disorientation of not having one, you skip the most important part of the process. You skip the encounter with what is actually left when everything temporary has been removed. You skip the moment of looking honestly at what you are underneath the structures. not the version assembled for others, but the quieter and more essential thing that was always beneath the assembling. Most people, if asked who they are, will answer with their roles, their history, their relationships, their accomplishments. This is reasonable. These things are real and they constitute a kind of identity, but they are all contingent. They can change, end, be taken. And what you are when those things are removed is the more fundamental question, the one the collapse is now asking, the one the rushing to rebuild was designed, without your full awareness, to delay. Think of a tree at the height of summer. Full canopy, leaves catching the light, the shape defined entirely by that abundance. In summer, the tree looks magnificent, but in summer, you can see very little of the tree's actual structure, the specific pattern of its branching, the way it reaches and organizes its growth, the essential skeleton beneath the abundance. Now, think of the same tree in deep winter. The leaves are gone, the branches are bare. The silhouette against the sky is stark. Many people seeing this would say the tree looks diminished, emptied, but the tree in winter reveals something the summer tree concealed, the actual architecture of the growth, the pattern that was always there, always organizing every leaf of every summer, now simply visible rather than decorated. You are the winter tree. What you are experiencing is not emptiness, it is the revelation of structure. The structure that was always there, that organized everything, that the fullness of your previous life was decorating rather than constituting. Begin quietly. Notice the impulse to fill the clearing. Notice when you reach for a new identity or a new story or a new role to organize around. You do not have to resist it. Entirely new structure will come, and this is not wrong. But each time the impulse arrives, pause for a moment before following it. Ask, what am I trying to cover? And let that question sit, unanswered, for just a little longer than feels comfortable. And once you can stay with the clearing, even briefly, a deeper question rises, one the collapse has been trying to ask all along. You have been asking, who am I now? Without these things. But beneath that question is a harder and more important one. Who was I, even with them? Because what the collapse has made visible, if you are willing to look directly at it, is this: the identity you had, the one that the collapse stripped away, was always substantially borrowed, not false, not a lie, not something to be ashamed of, but borrowed from the roles others needed you to play, borrowed from the relationships that gave you a mirror in which to see yourself, borrowed from the achievements that said, this person has value, this person has a place, this person can be named and located in the world. And now the borrowed things have been returned by circumstance, by change, by the ordinary chaos of a life that does not hold its shape indefinitely. This is not a revelation about your inadequacy. It is a revelation about your inadequacy. It is a revelation about the nature of identity itself. No one arrives fully formed. Everyone builds themselves from available materials, the materials of family, culture, relationship, work, accumulated experience. The self is not something you bring into the world in its final version. It is something that is made continuously in the encounter between what you are by nature and what the world around you presents to work with. And sometimes, when the materials that have been serving the building are removed, you get to see what you actually are beneath the borrowing. Not a diminished thing, a real one. Your suffering is not false. Some wounds are real. The disorientation of reaching for who you are and finding only a question, that is a genuine wound. It is not melodrama. It is not fragility. It is the honest experience of a person whose actual identity has been living in close proximity to borrowed structures for longer than they realized, and who now, in their absence, finds them unable to locate the original thing that is real, and it deserves to be named as real before it can be met with anything other than more confusion. Think of clay being fired in a kiln. Before the firing, the clay has a shape. It can hold water, it can function, but it is soft. It can hold water, it can function, but it is soft. It can be changed with relatively little pressure. It will deform under sustained weight. The fire of the kiln does not destroy the clay. It does not unmake it. What the fire removes is the water that was always temporary, the element that kept the clay flexible and impressionable and therefore unresolved. And what remains after the firing is something that was always within the clay, the actual structure, hardened, clarified, made definitive. The kiln does not create the vessel. It reveals what the clay was always capable of becoming. You are in the kiln. Do not confuse the heat with destruction. Do not confuse the discomforts of being changed at depth with the experience of being unmade. What is being removed was always temporary. What is being revealed was always yours. Can you be without the title and still feel that something in you knows what it is? Can you stand in the absence of the relationship that once defined your daily shape and understand yourself as something more than that absence? Can you look at the ruins of the life you had planned and feel, even faintly, even uncertainly, that what is standing in the ruins is not nothing? Do not hate yourself for not having immediate answers. Hatred is another cage, and you are in enough confinement already. These are not tests you must pass quickly. They are the actual terrain of the crossing, and they are answered not by thinking harder, but by staying in them long enough that something beneath the panic begins to surface. Begin quietly. Ask yourself one smaller question, not who am I, which is too large and too urgent, but this: what has not changed? What is present in you now that was also present before the collapse? What quality of your attention, your care, your values, your curiosity has remained intact, despite everything external being rearranged? Name one thing, only one thing, that the first, then is the reliable coordinate of the self you are actually searching for. And once you can name even one thing that has not changed, something shifts. The ground does not return all at once. This is not how it works. But something begins to take the place of the frantic searching. Something quieter. The beginning of a different kind of knowing. What is left when everything borrowed has been stripped away is not nothing. This matters enormously. The mind in the terror of the collapse tends toward one of two conclusions. We construct everything as fast as possible, or conclude that there is nothing to reconstruct from, that the collapse revealed an absence at the center rather than a core. Both are wrong. Both are the mind refusing to do the slower, harder, more necessary work of actually inhabiting what remains and allowing it to be what it is. What remains is the quality of your attention. It is still there, the way you notice things, the things you are drawn toward, the kinds of problems that pull your interest, the moments in which something in you quietly recognizes this is real, this matters. This quality did not fall with the structures. It was present before the first role was adopted, and it is present now in the rubble, unchanged. What remains is the direction of your care, not its specific objects, the relationship, the project, the career, but the direction itself, the fact that you care, that things matter to you, that you can be moved, that capacity for genuine engagement, for presence with what is actually in front of you, that did not collapse. It is here, quieter now, less certain of where to point, but here. What remains is your body's knowledge, the things you know before the mind has time to evaluate them, the tightening that says no before the reasoning arrives, the expansion that says yes before you have the words. This knowledge did not fall. It has in fact become somewhat clearer in the absence of all the noise that the structures produced. Think of a seed in dark soil. From outside, from any perspective that can observe it, the seed appears to be doing nothing. The burial looks like burial. The pressure looks like pressure. The darkness looks like darkness. But the seed is not waiting passively. Inside it, in conditions that look entirely hostile to growth, something is being organized. Something is reaching downward first, into the ground that will anchor everything that follows. Then, when the root has taken hold, upward, toward what the seed has always been moving toward. What looks like the most inactive moment is the most essential one. The growth that will be visible above the surface is being organized right now underground in the dark, in the exact conditions that look most like the absence of growth. What is happening in you right now looks like collapse from the outside. It may feel like collapse from the inside, but do not mistake the appearance for the full truth of what is occurring. Something is being organized beneath what is visible. Something is being organized beneath what is visible. Something is reaching, and when it surfaces, when the first clear direction becomes legible again, when the first true thing about who you are becomes something you can feel rather than only describe, it will have been built in this period, in the dark, in the pressure, in the precise conditions that looked most like nothing was happening. Daily life in this time is not ordinary. Every small choice carries unusual weight. The morning you decide what to do with the first quiet hour, that is practice. The conversation in which you do not perform the pre-collapse version of yourself, that is practice. The moment you sit with the groundlessness instead of reaching for something to cover it, that is practice. The ordinary day is the training ground. The disorientation is the curriculum. Not because suffering is good, it is not good in the abstract, and you are not required to be grateful for it, but because this particular disorientation is creating a kind of attention that comfort never produces, the attention of a person who can no longer take for granted who they are, and who is therefore, perhaps for the first time, beginning to find out. Begin quietly. Today, do one thing, just one, that is not organized around what you were before not a declaration of new identity, not a performance of rebuilding, one small thing that comes from what remains, from the quality of attention that is still intact, from the direction of care that has not left, from the body's knowledge that does not lie. Let that one thing, however small, be a step on ground that is genuinely yours. The falling apart is not the end of the story. It is often the only means by which a particular kind of story can begin. Not because suffering is instructive in a simple or comfortable sense, but because the collapse that strips away the borrowed identity creates a condition that stability never does, proximity to what is actually real in you. And that proximity, difficult as it is, disorienting as it is exactly what the slower, deeper work requires. You remove the urgency to rebuild immediately, and the clearing becomes habitable. Not comfortable, not for some time, but habitable. A place from which something true can begin to grow, rather than something assembled quickly from whatever was available in the aftermath of loss. You release the borrowed identities, not with bitterness, not with the verdict that they were failures, but with the understanding that they served their purpose and that you are now being asked to discover what exists beneath them. You stop measuring your current self against the self that existed before the collapse, as though the pre-collapse version were the standard and everything now is only deficit. And in releasing that measurement, something more honest becomes the reference, not who you were, but who you actually are. Slowly, underground, in the dark, in the process of becoming, you stop performing recovery, and actual recovery becomes possible, not restoration of the old structure, but the emergence of something that could not have emerged while that structure was in place. You stop asking, who am I without these things, as though the answer must resemble what came before, and you begin, slowly, haltingly, to discover what the collapse was always pointing toward. Think of the eye of a great storm. The storm is real, the rain, the violent turbulence at the edges. None of that is illusion. It takes things with it. It marks everything it passes through. but at the very center of the storm, not at the edges, not in the turbulence, at the center, there is a stillness that the storm does not produce and cannot destroy. It is not outside the storm, it is what the storm turns around. And paradoxically, the storm reviews it, because the storm removes everything that is not it. What remains at the center? The stillness that was always there, that needed the storm to make it visible. That is the self you have been searching for in the rubble. You were never only what you had built. You were always also the one who built it. The attention, the direction of care, the quality of presence that existed before the first role was adopted and has survived the collapse of every role since that, is still here, smaller than you expected the self to be, less certain than you would like, without much visible structure in this moment, but present, real, and capable of building again, more deliberately, from what has proven itself to remain. Let your life become the evidence, not the declaration that you have found yourself to remain. Let your dike become the evidence, not the conversation in which you explain to someone that you have come through the other side. It lives in the quality of the choices you make now. The slow, honest choices of a person who has stopped performing an identity and has started building one from what actually remains. It lives in the thing you do today from the actual ground of who you are, not from who you thought you were supposed to be. It lives in the small, unglamorous, unwitnessed practice of returning to the quality of attention that is still yours, to the direction of care that has not changed, to the body's knowledge that has been waiting patiently for the noise to clear. That is where you will find who you are now, not in the answer that arrives quickly, in the practice of living the question with enough honesty and enough steadiness that the answer over time reveals itself. You are still here. You were always still here. What fell was not you.